People who haven't experienced narcissistic abuse do not know what it is to suffer at the hands of a narcissist. They say things that completely invalidate your pain and suffering and unfortunately isolate you in your experience. You feel completely misunderstood. You feel like nobody gets you. Yeah, your friends and family may support you for a certain time, but then they start getting tired of listening to the same thing again and again, and they start advising you to move on, and they start reprimanding you. They start suggesting things like, you should date, there are plenty of fish in the sea. Why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? This really disenfranchises you as a survivor because your trauma is not something that you can consciously get rid of. It's not like you push a button on a remote. It's not controlled by something outside of you. It's not like you can wave a wand and make it go away. That is not how it works. It's pure trauma. And I understand why these people might say things that logically sound correct and true, but they do not apply to you. Hi, I am Danish, a narcissistic abuse recovery professional. In this episode, we are going to talk about such 5 sayings that people tell you and why these sayings do not apply to you. We are going to talk about the invalidation that you feel and how it impacts you as a survivor, why you should not take them personally. Before we talk about any of this, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to this channel and press the bell icon to stay notified with everything latest that I post over here. Let's get started with the saying number 1. Everything happens for a reason. God has a plan. It happened because God wanted you to become stronger. Now move on. This is so invalidating because you are not abused for a reason. I understand that a person has to face hardships in their life. They have to go through tough times to become resilient, to explore their potential and strengths, innate capacity within them. But that doesn't mean you have to be abused for years on a stretch. You have to be belittled, humiliated, gaslighted, manipulated, love-bombed, devalued, and discarded like you didn't matter to feel strong. No, you didn't have to get abused and then justify it by saying like, yeah, there was a reason why it happened. No, there wasn't any reason. Yes, your experience that you had with a narcissist probably was a catalyst, and it can be used to become more aware of your wounds, but in no way it means that it had to happen for you to become better. The truth is that this person abused you, and they consciously did, and it could all have been prevented if they were not an asshole that they are. They caused it to you, and you cannot justify it on the basis of it was a divine plan that had to be executed through this person. You need to remember that. Number 2, you are your only limit. Your inability to function does not mean you are lazy, you are procrastinating, or you are not motivated to make your life better. Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that. You're not your only limit. Your limit is the trauma that you have been through. We need to understand that when someone experiences the kind of trauma that you have experienced, they develop what we call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I prefer to call it complex post-traumatic stress response. They adapt in such a way that their focus just becomes survival. And when you're surviving, you're not living, you are just existing. You have adapted in ways that helped you to cope in the environment that you were exposed to. But the same adaptations and the coping mechanisms may not be totally applicable to the normal environment that you probably are in now. But that doesn't mean your responses are wrong, or you're being lazy, or you're procrastinating. It just means that these are normal, biologically correct responses that you developed to the totally abnormal situation that you were present in and that you had to survive. Before we move to number 3, I'm really curious to know, what is that one saying, that one thing that you're tired of hearing again and again, and you do not want the people to say it to you again? What is that one thing that makes you feel so invalidated and isolated in your experience? Drop your answers below in the comments, because the probability is the friends and the family of the survivors, if they happen to watch this video or listen to this episode, they might read these comments and become more aware about the trauma inflicted by experiencing narcissistic abuse. Let's move on to number 3. You get what you give. There is so much victim blaming in this one saying. You did not do anything. You did not do anything to deserve the kind of treatment the narcissist gave you. You did not do anything to deserve to be abused. Because there are so many philosophies out there, spiritual and other stuff, people talk about law of attraction, karma. All of these things are good and they have their own application. But we can't mix it all up because then it becomes a mess. If we say, well, it was your karma in the past life and now you're facing it, you should take it, you deserved it. What are we doing? Logically, it makes sense. Like, spiritually, that makes sense. I'm paying for my bad deeds. That is not true. Practically, realistically speaking, it has nothing to do with what you have done either in the present life or in the past life. None of that matters. What matters and what the truth is, the narcissist is an abuser. The person who abused you made intentional choices to cause you the harm they caused, and they were aware of what they are doing at some level. The level of awareness was enough for them to stop themselves from doing what they were doing. But no, they kept doing it because it benefited them. So it has nothing to do with your karma, with your deeds, with attraction, with anything that you know of, and can say that, yeah, that is a thing that caused this, or that is a thing in me that made this happen. It isn't your reactive abuse. It isn't what you said, what you did, how you behaved that made this happen. It isn't what you gave to the narcissist, when in reality you gave everything. You gave everything that you had to offer. And what you got back? Abuse. You didn't deserve that. It is not your fault. Please remember and embody that deep down your psyche, deep in your body, that it isn't you. It is totally them. In this context, it takes two to tango, or it takes two hands to clap. That doesn't apply. We can't mix up things. Then it becomes really complicated to make sense of, truth from lies. We can't bring these two together and say, well, this is also possible and that is also possible. Both parties have a role to play. That is not true. You were abused, you are the victim, and if there is anyone to be blamed, it is a narcissist. Saying number 4. To forgive is the highest form of love. While I believe in some spiritual principles and I think it has a huge role to play in the human development in general, like the awareness of why we are here, what all of this means. But in this context, this can be a really dangerous thing to say or to believe in. Look at all the years that you spent in the narcissistic relationship. What were you doing all the time? What were you made to do? Forgive them. Yeah, this time he was angry, she lost it because things were not working, and then you lost so much time just forgiving. You need to understand that forgiveness is a virtue that a narcissist keeps taking advantage of. They cannot respect the fact that you are a forgiving person. You believe in letting go. Or the opposite, they see it as a permission for exploitation. Like, okay, she is or he is so forgiving. They're so kind, which means I can do anything and get away with it. You need to understand that forgiveness is a choice. As much as you would want to believe in it, it is a choice in my opinion. A better alternative to forgiveness would be indifference if you do not believe in forgiving. While forgiveness can be therapeutic, but it's not mandatory for healing. You cannot keep forgiving a person who keeps taking advantage of you. Number 5 and the last one. Your problem isn't the problem. Your reaction is. In the realm of psychology and therapy, we focus on your reactions. Like, okay, that is a problem, but how are you reacting to it? What can you do differently? What can you change in yourself? The core belief is that the environment that you're reacting to is neutral. And if you were to change something in yourself, something in your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior, the environment would naturally change. That is a good thing to believe in. That's a good thing to practice. In situations that are not as pervasive, as adverse, and as stressful, and as controlled as, a situation in a narcissistic relationship and the environment that gets created in such a relationship. When you're constantly pushed, provoked, tormented, tortured, terrorized, pushed, pulled, dragged, torn apart, what are you going to do ultimately? What are you going to say? What are you going to think? How are you going to behave? Of course, you are going to react because you're designed to react in such a situation. If we look at it from the lens of evolution, you have that reptilian side in you that is quite reactive and only knows to fight, flight, or freeze. And that is what gets activated, and you feel like you're reacting to the narcissist. You start reacting to the narcissist the way they are treating you. If they're yelling, you also start yelling. If they're physically abusing you, you also start physically abusing them. You become a completely different version of yourself, a version that you never thought you would become, that you don't recognize. And then people start calling you crazy, and narcissists being the first person to do so. And then people may tell you, that is not the problem, you can't control them. And unfortunately, many therapists do say this. And if your therapist said this, please let me know in the comments. You're not the problem, you can't control them. You have no control over their life. You can only control yourself. You only have the power over your choices. Leave them. Let's not focus on them. Focus on your choices. What can you do differently? And that is when the victim, unfortunately, gets re-victimized, because the person who is asking this question doesn't have the true understanding and experience of narcissistic abuse, doesn't know how the relationship between a perpetrator and a victim works, what the dynamics look like, and how complicated and complex they are. So you need to understand that the problem is the problem. Your reaction is the biologically correct response. And anybody at your place would have reacted the same way you did, because that is what we are designed to do. That is what we are shaped by God, universe, or whatever it is that you believe in to do, and that is how anybody would have behaved. That was it for today's episode. I hope you found it insightful. If you did, please drop a like, let me know in the comment, and make sure to share this episode with other people. I'll talk with you in the next one. Until then, let the healing begin.